The FBI recently raided the office and cannabis shop of Virginia State Senator Louise Lucas. Is this just a local story, or are we looking at the first tremors of something much bigger shaking up national politics? So far, Lucas hasn't been charged with any crime, but the feds didn't just show up for nothing. Agents took electronics and other items from her office and cannabis shop, all part of an ongoing investigation into alleged bribery and influence peddling. Well, joining us with more is Victoria Churchill, U.S. political reporter at the Daily Mail. Victoria, Lucas, the president pro tempore of the Virginia State Senate, said this is political. Donald Trump is out to get her because of her leadership in Virginia's recent congressional redistricting efforts. But didn't this corruption investigation begin about 3 years ago under the Biden administration? Tell us more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this investigation did begin under the Biden administration. So, this is just a federal agency doing their job, trying to cross all their T's and dot all their I's into tips that they may or may not have received. Louise Lucas, of course, is very powerful, president pro tem of the Virginia Senate. Her district in Portsmouth, just in your guys' backyard there in Hampton Roads. But of course, her influence has expanded all across the state, and really with this Virginia redistricting push that she was a major proponent of, to the point where, she had actually attacked Virginia's federal senators, Mark Warner, as well as Tim Kaine. They were actually reluctant to push this idea of the 10-1 map that she envisioned, which would have gotten rid of every single Republican congressional district except for one. And, she basically, I think for lack of a better description, I think she basically bullied them into backing her plan.
Well, but this wasn't really about that, though, was it? I mean, this investigation's been going on for, 3 years now?
Right, exactly. This investigation has been going on for a very long time, but, we were just talking about the power. I think that we've seen really nationwide that power is going to be held accountable, whether that's here in Congress with a lot of what I've covered, for example, the Epstein issue, but also in the states, in Virginia, and even in Michigan. I covered last week, there was a case where a top ally of Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, was, she had 16 charges filed against her by a fellow Democrat, the Attorney General. And so I think that this goes at this accountability push that we're really seeing nationwide really goes beyond partisanship, and that people are willing to hold members of their own political party accountable, which I think is, it's good for the country that people aren't willing to turn a blind eye.
Well, I want to talk about that some more in a minute, but first back to Lucas. She owns a cannabis business in Portsmouth, Virginia, also some group homes and Medicaid facilities. So was this FBI raid more about irregularities and accounting at the cannabis business, or Medicaid billing with the group homes? Because we know Medicaid's been under investigation in Virginia. So what do we know?
I think it's probably all of the above, right? She had claimed for a long time that she wasn't selling any illegal substances. I think that itself is under investigation. And also we look at the Medicaid thing, there's, of course, the fraud in Minnesota, another state where people have really been raising the alarm over there that, again, people just really can't get away with just having federal programs kind of be a blank check for anything that they want. And I think, again, that's good for the American taxpayer. We pay so much in taxes. Of course, in Virginia, we are basically under the new administration with Abigail Spanberger. She's looking to tax everything from, gym memberships, streaming services, things that everyday Americans enjoy that, are just little luxuries that people build into their budget, and they're trying to make them more and more expensive. And, of course, Lucas has been a big part of that as the Senate president pro tem. She's kind of the one in charge of shepherding all of this. And so, on the one hand, she's trying to squeeze every penny out of Virginians, but on the other hand, she may have potentially been misusing some of the funds that she's gotten from these taxpayer dollars. So really kind of alarm bells all around, and I'm looking forward to covering the investigation as it develops.
Yeah, we'll find out more in the days ahead. But what does this mean on the federal level? The start of many more, do you think, anti-corruption raids across the country targeting our politicians?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, on the one hand, politicians write the laws, and on the other hand, they benefit from them. Like, that doesn't add up to me. And again, I think there's been pushes for accountability. Even for example, with stock trading and members of Congress, there's been several proposals that people have tried to shepherd through. And so, again, I think this is really just good for the average American citizen, good for the average U.S. taxpayer, where the ones writing the rules can't be the ones to bend them to their will, with knowing them really better than the average American.
Trump's critics say this is only political retribution, and he complained about the weaponization of the FBI and DOJ under Biden, but now he's doing the same thing. Is he?
No, I mean, again, as we talked about earlier in the show, this was an investigation that was started under the Biden administration. And so just because somebody of the opposite political party to the president is being held accountable doesn't mean that the investigation itself is political.
And Victoria, it seems that state capitals are the new battlegrounds now. State leaders are coming to blows with the feds as Vice President J.D. Vance and his task force work to uncover Medicaid fraud and corruption in places like Minnesota, California, New York, just about every state. So do you see the most success on this coming on the federal or state level? And how likely is it that state leaders and opposing political parties would cooperate with Vance and the feds?
Well, again, I think we're seeing people hold members of their own political parties accountable. Like I mentioned with Michigan, this is somebody that had fundraised extensively for the governor and other Michigan Democrats being held accountable by the Attorney General of Michigan, who is also currently a Democrat. And so, again, I think that this is something that goes beyond partisanship. I think state capitals are definitely the major battlegrounds, even though I personally cover Capitol Hill now. A lot of my background, I started covering Virginia politics, working for American Liberty News and the Republican Standard a few years ago. And so, this is something that I've always had a focus on. And during the 2024 campaign, I covered the swing states, particularly in North Carolina and Pennsylvania, and also, with Virginia. That's kind of up for debate whether or not we're a swing state, even though at the end of the day, the ballot box seems to be going Democrat. I think even when we look at this recent redistricting push, actually the districts that would have been most affected by this were pretty much an even split, kind of sided with this 10-1 referendum by the narrowest of margins. And so I think that really does speak to the idea that Virginia can and maybe will in the future vote for Republicans. And so, again, I think that really speaks to the fact that, people want accountability, and particularly in things that they feel like they're going to be most affected by. That's when they turn out. That's when they vote for the leaders that will make decisions for them.
Yeah, they want accountability. Many Americans often complain that the big name politicians rarely go to prison for fraud, bribery, and corruption. So do you agree with that? And what action do you expect will be forthcoming from the Trump administration in the days ahead?
I think out of Washington, we have to wait and see. Again, I do think that this is something that Congress is investigating. So, for example, we mentioned Minnesota. I think both you and I mentioned Minnesota. They wanted the governor, Tim Walz, he did come to Washington to testify about his knowledge in his own state, Keith Ellison as well. So Washington is being willing to put the feet to the fire for some of these local and state elected officials. But I also, again, think that goes both ways. If there's policy that's being written in Washington that's being exploited in the states, I think there's kind of both sides of the equation that want to see the accountability for that.
Okay, cleaning up corruption in Washington and in the state capitals. We'll see if it's a dust rag or a Brillo pad, okay? U.S. political reporter for the Daily Mail, Victoria Churchill. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Gary. Hope to be back soon.